morals and dogma, the fellowcraft. Influence of man over man is a law of nature, whether it be by a great estate in land or an intellect. It may mean slavery, a deference to the immanent human judgment. Society hangs spiritually together, like the revolving spheres above. The free country in which intellect and genius govern will endure. Where they serve and other influences govern, the national life is short. All the nations that have tried to govern themselves by their smallest, by the incapable, or merely respectables have come to naught. Constitution and laws without genius and intellect to govern will not prevent decay. In that case, they have the dry rot, and the life dies out of them by degree. To give a nation the franchise of the intellect is the only sure mode of perpetuating freedom. This will compel exertion and generous care for the people from those on the higher seats, and honorable and intellect allegiance from those below. Then political public life will protect all men from self-abasement and sensual pursuits, from vulgar acts and low greed by giving the noble ambition of just imperial rule. To elevate the people by teaching loving kindness and wisdom, with power to him who teaches best, and so to develop the free state from the rough ashlar. This is the great labor in which Masonry desires to lend a helping hand. All of us should labor in building up the great moment of a nation, the holy house of the temple. The cardinal virtues must not be partitioned among men, becoming the exclusive property of some, like the common crafts. All are apprenticed to the partners, duty and honor. Masonry is a march and a struggle toward the light, for the individual as well as the nation. Light is virtue, manliness, intelligence, liberty. Tyranny over the soul or body is darkness. The freest people, like the freest men, is always in danger of relapse into servitude. Wars are almost always fatal to republics. They create tyrants and consolidate their power. They spring for the most part from evil counsels. When the small and the base are entrusted with power, legislation and administration becomes but two parallel series of errors and blunders, ending in war, calamity, and the necessity for a tyrant. When the nation feels its feet sliding backward, as if it walked on the ice, the time has come for a supreme effort. The magnificent tyrants of the past are but the types of those of the future. Men and nations will always sell themselves into slavery to gratify their passions and obtain revenge. The tyrant's plea, necessity, is always available, and the tyrant, once in power, the necessity of providing for his safety makes him savage. Religion is a power, and he must control that. Independent, its sanctuaries might rebel. Then it becomes unlawful for the people to worship God in their own way, and the old spiritual despotisms revive. Men must believe as power wills, or die. And even if they may believe as they will, all they have, lands, house, body, and soul, are stamped with the royal brand. I am the state, the Louis XIV to his peasants. The very shirts on our backs are mine, and I can take them if I will. And dynasties so established endure, like that of the Caesars of Rome, or the Caesars of Constantinople, or the Caliphs of the Stuarts, or the Spaniards, the Goths, the Valois, until the race wears out and ends with lunatics and idiots who still rule. There is no concord among men to end the horrible bondage. The state falls inwardly as well as the outward blows of the incoherent elements. The furious human passions, the sleeping human indolence, the stolid human ignorance, the rivalry of human castes are as good for the kings as the sword of the paladins. The worshippers have all bowed so long to that old idol that they cannot go into the streets and choose another Grand Lama. And so the effete state floats on down the puddled stream of time, and until the tempest or the tidal sea discovers the worm has consumed its strength and it crumbles into oblivion. Civil and religious freedom must go hand in hand, and persecution matures them both. A people content with the thoughts made for them by the priests of a church will be content with royalty by divine right, the church and the throne mutually sustaining each other. They will smother schism and reap infidelity and indifference, and while the battle for freedom goes on around them, they will only sink the more apathetically into servitude and a deep trance, perhaps occasionally interrupted by furious fits of frenzy, followed by helpless exhaustion. Despotism is not difficult in any land that has only known one master from its childhood, but there is no harder problem than to perfect and perpetuate free government by the people themselves. For it is not one king that is needed. All must be kings. It is easy to set up Mancello that in a few days he may fall lower than before. But free government grows slowly, like the individual human faculties, and, like the forest trees, from the inner heart outward. Liberty is not only the common birthright, but it is lost as well by non-user as by misuser. It depends far more on the universal effort than any other human property. It has no single shrine or holy well of pilgrimage for the nation, for its waters should burst out freely from the whole soil. The free popular power is one that is only known in its strength in the hour of adversity. For all its trials, sacrifices, and expectations are its own. It is trained to think for itself and also act for itself. When the enslaved people prostrate themselves in the dust before the hurricane, like the alarmed beasts of the field, the free people stand erect before it, in all the strength of unity and self-reliance and mutual reliance, with effrontery against all but the visible hand of God. It is neither cast down by calamity nor elated by success. This vast power of endurance, of forbearance, of patience, and of performance is only acquired by continual exercise of all the functions, like the healthful physical human vigor, like the individual moral vigor. And the maxim is no less true than old. The eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. It is curious to observe the universal pretext by which the tyrants of all times take away the national liberties. It is stated in the statutes of Edward II that the justice and the sheriff should no longer be elected by the people on account of the riots and dissensions which had arisen. The same reason was given long before for the suppression of popular election of the bishops. And there is a witness to this untruth in the yet older times when Rome lost her freedom and her indigent citizens declared that tumultuous liberty is better than disgraceful tranquility. With the compass and scale, we can trace all the figures used in mathematics of planes, or in what are called geometry and trigonometry, two worlds that are themselves deficient in meaning. Geometry, which the letter G in most lodges is said to signify, means measurement of land, or the earth, or surveying, and trigonometry, the measure of triangles or figures with three sides or angles. The latter is by far the most appropriate name for the science intended to be expressed by the word geometry. Neither is of a meaning significantly wide, for although the vast surveys of great spaces of the earth's surface and of coasts, by which shipwrecks and calamity to mariners are avoided, are effected by means of triangulation, though it was by the same method that the late French astronomer measured a degree of latitude and so established a scale of measures on an immutable basis. Though it is by means of the immense triangle that has for its base a line drawn in imagination between the place of the earth now and its place 6 months hence in space, and for its apex a planet or star, that the distance of Jupiter or Sirius from the earth is ascertained. And though there is a triangle still more vast, its base extending either way from us with the past the horizon into immensity, and its apex infinitely distant above us, to which corresponds a similar infinite triangle below. What is above equaling what is below, immensity equaling immensity. Yet the science of numbers, to which Pythagoras attached so much importance, and whose mysteries are found everywhere in the ancient religions, and most of the Kabbalah and in the Bible, is not sufficiently expressed by the word geometry, or the word trigonometry. For that science includes these with arithmetic and also with algebra, logarithms, and integral differential calculus, and by means of it are worked out the great problems of astronomy or the laws of the stars. Virtue is but heroic bravery. To do the thing thought to be true, in spite of all enemies of flesh or spirit, in despite of all temptation or menaces. Man is accountable for the uprightness of his doctrine, but not for the rightness of it. Devout enthusiasm is far easier than a good action. The end of thought is action. The sole purpose of religion is an ethic. Theory in political science is worthless except for the purpose of being realized in practice. In every credo, religious or political, as in the soul of man, there are two regions, in the dialectic and in the ethic, and it is only when the two are harmoniously blended that a perfect discipline is evolved. There are men who dialectically are Christians, as there are a multitude who dialectically are Masons, and yet who are ethically infidels, as these are ethically of the profane in the strictest sense, intellectual believers, but practical atheists, men who will write you evidences and perfect faith in their logic, but cannot carry out the Christian or Masonic doctrine, owing to the strength or weakness of the flesh. On the other hand, there are many dialectical skeptics, but ethical believers, as there are many Masons who have never undergone initiation, and as ethics are the end and purpose of a religion, so are the ethical believers the most worthy. He who does right is better than he who thinks right. But you must not act upon the hypothesis that all men are hypocrites, whose conduct does not square with their sentiments. No vice is more rare, for no task is more difficult than systematic hypocrisy. When the demagogue becomes a usurper, it does not follow that he was all the time a hypocrite. Shallow men only so judge of others. The truth is that creed has, in general, very little influence on the conduct. In religion, on that of the individual, in politics of that party. As a general thing, the Mohammedan in the Orient is far more honest and trustworthy than the Christian. A gospel of love in the mouth is an avatar of persecution in the heart. Men who believe in eternal damnation and in a literal sea of fire and brimstone incur the certainty of it according to their creed on the slightest temptation of appetite or passion. Predestination insists on the necessity of good works. In Masonry, at the least flow of passion, one speaks ill of another behind his back, and so, far from the brotherhood of blue masonry being real and the solemn pledges contained in the use of the word brother being complied with, extraordinary pains are taken to show that masonry is a sort of abstraction which scorns to interfere in worldly matters. The rule may be regarded as universal, that where there is a choice to be made, a Mason will give his vote and influence in politics and business to the less qualified profane in preference to the better qualified Mason. One will take an oath to oppose any unlawful usurpation of power, and then become the ready and even eager instrument of a usurper. Another will call one brother, and then play toward him the part of Judas Iscariot, or strike him as Joab did Abner under the fifth rib with a lie whose authorship is not to be traced. Masonry does not change human nature and cannot make honest men out of born knaves. While you are still engaged in preparation and in accumulating principles for future use, do not forget the words of the Apostle James. For if any man be a hearer of the word, and not a doer, he is like unto a man beholding his natural face in a glass. For he beholdeth himself, and goeth away, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. But whoso hath looked into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth, he being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his work. If any man among you seem to be religious, and bridleth not his tongue, but deceiveth his own heart, this man's religion is vain. Faith, if it hath not works, is dead, being an abstraction. A man is justified by works, and not by faith only. The devils believe and tremble. As the body without the heart is dead, so is faith without the works. In political science, also, free governments are erected and free constitutions framed upon some simple and intelligible theory. Upon whatever theory they are based, no sound conclusion is to be reached except by carrying the theory out without flinching, both in argument on constitutional questions and in practice. Shrinking from the true theory through timidity, or wander from it through want of the illogical faculty, or transgress against it through passion or on the plea of necessity or expediency, and you have denial or invasion of rights, laws that often offend against the first principles, usurpation of illegal powers, or abrogation or abdication of legitimate authority. Do not forget either that as the showy, superficial, impudent, and self-conceited will almost always be preferred, even in utmost stress or danger and calamity of the state, to the man of solid learning, large intellect, and Catholic sympathies, because he is nearer the common popular and legislative level, so the highest truth is not acceptable to the mass of mankind. When Solon was asked if he had given his countrymen the best laws, he answered, "The best they are capable of receiving." This is one of the profoundest utterances on record, and yet, like all great truths, so simple as to be rarely comprehended. It contains the whole philosophy of history. It utters a truth which, had it been recognized, would have saved men an immensity of vain, idle disputes, and have led them into the clearer paths of knowledge in the past. It means this, that all truths are truths of period, and not truths for eternity. That whatever great fact has had strength and vitality enough to make itself real, whether of religion, morals, government, or on whatever else, and to find place in this world, has been a truth for the time, and as good as men were capable of receiving. So too with great men, the intellect and capacity of a people has a single measure, that of the great men whom Providence gives it and whom it receives. There have always been men too great for their time or their people. Every people makes such men only its idols, as it is capable of comprehending. To impose ideal truth or law upon an incapable and merely real man must ever be a vain and empty speculation. The laws of sympathy govern in this that they do in regard to men who are put at the head. We do not know as yet what qualifications the sheep insist on in a leader. With men who are too high intellectually, the mass have as little sympathy as they have with the stars. When Burke, the wisest statesman England ever had, rose to speak, the House of Commons was depopulated as upon an agreed signal. There is as little sympathy between the mass and the highest truths, the highest truth being incomprehensible to the man of realities, as the highest man is, and largely above his level, will be a great unreality and falsehood to an unintellectual man. The profoundest doctrines of Christianity and philosophy would be mere jargon and babble to a Potawatomi Indian. The popular explanations of the symbols of Masonry are fitting for the multitude that has swarmed into the temple, being fully up to the level of their capacity. Catholicism was a vital truth in its earliest ages, but it became obsolete as Protestantism arose and flourished and deteriorated. The doctrines of Zoroaster were the best which the ancient Persians were fitted to receive. Those of Confucius were fitted for the Chinese, those of Muhammad for the idolatrous Arabs of his age. Each was truth for the time. Each was a gospel preached by the reformer. And if any man were so little fortunate as to remain content therewith, when others have attained a higher truth, it is their misfortune and not their fault. They are to be pitied for it and not persecuted. Do not expect easily to convince men of the truth, or to lead them to think aright. The subtle human intellect can weave its mists over even the clearest vision. Remember that it is eccentric enough to ask unanimity from a jury, but to ask it from any large number of men on any point of political faith is amazing. You can hardly get two men in any Congress or convention to agree. Nay, you can rarely get one to agree with himself. The political church which chances to be supreme anywhere has an indefinite number of tongues. How then can we expect men to agree as to matters beyond the cognizance of the sense? How can we compress the infinite and the invisible with any chain of evidence? Ask the small sea waves what they murmur among the pebbles. How many of those words that come from the invisible shore are lost, like the birds in the long passage? How vainly do we strain the eyes across the long infinite? We must be content, as the children are, with the pebbles that have been stranded, since it is forbidden us to explore the hidden depths. The fellowcraft is especially taught by this not to become wise in his own conceit. Pride in unsound theories is worse than ignorance. Humility becomes a Mason. Take some quiet, sober moment of life and add together the two ideas of pride and man. Behold him, creatures of a span, stalking through infinite space in all the grandeur of littleness. Perched on a speck of the universe, every wind of heaven strikes into his blood the coldness of death. His soul floats away from his body like the melody from the string. Day and night, like dust on the wheel, he is rolled along the heaven through a labyrinth of words, and all the creation of God are flaming on every side, further than even his imagination can reach. Is this a creature to make for himself a crown of glory? To deny his own flesh, to mock at his fellow? Spring with him from that dust to which both will soon return? Does the proud man not err? Does he not suffer? Does he not die? When he reasons, he is never stopped short by difficulties. When he acts, does he never succumb to the temptation of pleasure? When he lives, is he free from any pain? Do the diseases not claim him as their prey? When he dies, can he escape the common grave? Pride is not the heritage of man. Humility should dwell with frailty and atone for ignorance, error, and imperfection. Neither should the mason be over anxious for office and honor. However, certainly he may feel that he has capacity to serve the state. He should neither seek nor spurn honors. It is good to enjoy the blessings of fortune. It is better to submit without a pang to their loss. The greatest deeds are not done in the glare of light and before the eyes of the populace. He whom God has gifted with love of retirement possesses, as it were, an additional sense, and among the vast and noble scenes of nature, we find balm for the wounds we have received among the pitiful shifts of policy. For the attachment to solitude is the surest preservation from the ills of life. But resignation is more noble in proportion as it is less passive. Retirement is only a morbid selfishness as it prohibits exertions for others, as it is only dignified and noble when it is the shade whence the oracles issue that are to instruct mankind. And retirement of this nature is the sole seclusion which a good and wise man will covet or command. The very philosophy which makes such a man covet the quiet will make him eschew the inutility of the hermitage. Very little praiseworthy would Lord Bolingbroke have seemed among his haymakers and ploughmen, if among haymakers and ploughmen he had looked with an indifferent eye upon the profligate minister and the venal parliament. Very little interest would have attached to his beans and vetches if beans and vetches has caused him to forget that if he was happier on a farm, he could be more useful in a senate, and made him forego in the sphere of a bailiff all care for re-entering that of a legislator. Remember also that there is an education which quickens the intellect and leaves the heart hollower or hardier than before. There are ethical lessons in the laws of the heavenly bodies and the proportion of earthly elements in geography, chemistry, geology, and all the material sciences. Things are symbols of truths. Properties are symbols of truths. Science, not teaching moral and spiritual truths, is dead and dry, of little more real value than to commit to the memory a long row of unconnected dates or of the names of bugs or butterflies.